Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Midweek Blessing. We do this at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday evening, but most of you, by far, most of you watch it on the weekend. But we record it in the middle of the week. So it's a midweek blessing, but if it's a weekend blessing for you, there's absolutely no problem with that. We are in Pierre, South Dakota, right in the middle of the state. And we are in the underground church. It's in the basement of the Seventh-day Adventist Church here in Pierre. And tonight, as we go through our Bibles, one chapter 3 at a time, we are at Daniel, which around here is a book we like. We take a look at this book quite a bit. This is also why I'm really glad that we're doing chapter 3s and not chapter 11s, because Daniel gets going in some weeds. But we'll take a look at that. But first of all, hi, Tammy.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm very good. I'm very good. So right up until we had your grandson, right here till like 2 minutes ago.
Yes.
We all just sort of,
I know.
but it was really nice.
Yes, he's a bright spot, that's for sure.
So the happiest person on the internet is even happier tonight.
Yes,
So.
yes.
How's the weather?
Well, the weather's pretty much the same. It's going to be hot. We're like
quite
50
warm.
degrees above normal.
So earlier this afternoon, I came across to put the graphics all together. And it was really windy.
Yes. Oh, it's going to be worse tomorrow.
And I looked, I said, yeah, there's some wind
Yes,
coming. So
yep.
I put a little wind graphic
Oh,
up
did
tonight.
you?
Yeah.
Okay.
There
Oh,
look
there
at
you
that,
go.
yeah.
Well, that's
But when I
probably-
walked over just now, there's not a scrap of wind
No.
out there at all. Because it
It's
said
gearing
wind
up.
for the next day and a half.
It's gearing up for tomorrow. It's 25 to 35 and 50 mile an hour gusts. So it's going to be windy, really windy.
Time to close the windows?
Oh, yeah, I'd say so. Do you have your air fixed?
No. The landlord decided that we needed a better quote.
Oh. Okay. I see.
think I gave him a heart attack.
Okay.
So, yeah, anyway,
Yeah, no.
I'm fine until the heat comes.
Yes,
And then I'll have
yeah.
a very different attitude
Well, it's going to
towards
be
it.
90s all week until Tuesday next week. So,
But the little bit of wind.
yeah, you might want your windows open.
So for those who are not from South Dakota, all right, tell us just a little bit about wind.
We have it all the time. Very seldom do we have days where there isn't any wind.
And we don't call it a breeze.
No, it's usually wind.
It's wind. Yes.
Because it's usually not a breeze.
No, that's what I've learned
No,
moving here.
but
That
I like it though. I mean, if you're out in the backyard and there's trees, like I've watched the tree over at Jim and Sandy's if we stop over there and they've got one in their front yard. You just sit there and it's really quiet and you can just hear the wind,
Yeah,
blowing
that's
through.
true.
It's
Inside,
beautiful.
it's very
I love
nice.
It. Yes.
Yes, that's
Yep.
right.
So I don't mind it so bad. So.
Outside in the winter.
Yeah, it's not so nice.
So I was listening to something because someone else was going to listen to it on the channel back on our Revelation thing. So I wanted to kind of remember what they were going to see. And I said there when I first came that snow does not melt in South Dakota. We just wait for it to blow away.
Pretty much.
That's how I felt.
Yep.
All right, we
That's
should
true.
probably get going because we
Yes,
got
yeah.
Daniel, but thank you for the weather.
Yes, you're welcome.
All right, we're going to take a little overview of the whole book, which is something that we like to do. And I've asked John, one of my friends here and our head elder at our church, he's going to give us a quick overview of the whole book because Daniel has some meat to it. And as we've done all the way through this series, it gives a little context to what we're going to say when we get to chapter 3. So, hi, John.
Hi.
Boy, you and Tammy switched like that today.
We morph into one another.
Yeah, you did that really well. It's like we had almost like another place to sit or something. If I'd have been quiet, we would never have known. So, Daniel, how did you feel when I asked you to do Daniel? Was that a good thing or a
I
thing?
felt a little overwhelmed.
Yeah, yes. Well, we won't hold you to anything because if you get 4 theologians together, you're going to have at least 4 or 5 ideas of what Daniel is. So, you'll be fine. Well, give us a overview.
You can really dive in deep in the book of Daniel, but in my short time period that I have here, I'm just going to give you a broad overview of the book. And for instance, the name Daniel means God is my judge. And so that kind of kicks off the whole book right there. Daniel, I feel, is one of those foundational books of the Bible. And It is one that we can look at the prophetic timeline that is portrayed in the book of Daniel, and we can look back on all of those things that took place and know that the Bible is real. I mean,
Right.
God,
Because it's happened.
it's happened.
Yeah, we
And,
get on this side of it. We get to
we
see.
can see that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know there's people out there that they look at that and they say, well, you know, that's because we write our thoughts into what Daniel was written about. But then we have archaeology to back us
Yeah,
up on a
that's
lot
true.
of the stuff that
That's
we
true.
find in there.
Yeah.
So the book of Daniel is divided into two sections and or two parts. It's not actually divided, but you can look at it as two parts. We have chapters 1 through 6, and that basically is a narrative of just the basic stories. And then the chapters 7 and 12, we get into the visions that Daniel was given. And just a broad overview of each chapter. We have chapter 1, we have where Judah was captured by Babylon, and then we have the introduction of who Daniel and his three friends are, and how they became part of this whole story. Chapter 2, we have the king of Babylon, and he has a dream. And so we have Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and then we have the interpretations of that dream.
We're going to take a little look at that tonight.
And then, of course, we have a story that most everybody is familiar with. We have the story of the fiery furnace, and that occurs in chapter 3.
And look at that one too, yeah.
And how that all plays out. Chapter 4 and 5 we have where it's the humbling of Nebuchadnezzar the king. And then we have the divine sentence that was given against his son. Now that's kind of a broad, it may have been his son.
Yeah, we could, yeah.
May have been his grandson or
nephew or, yeah. We
anyway, the next person in charge anyway, Belshazzar, and he has a divine sentence given to him by God. Chapter 6 is we have the conspiracy against Daniel, and another one of those epic stories that's from the Bible, and that's where Daniel is thrown into the lion's den and how God was able to deliver him from the lion's den. Chapter 7 is where we begin with the visions. And he has a vision of 4 kingdoms or 4 beasts. And then we have chapters 8 and 12 is just the prophetic timeline that takes place in these visions that Daniel has. And it all goes from how Israel is captured and all through until the temple is restored, and the deliverance of God's people. And so we can look at that even down to the end of time if we so choose that. So yes, the book of Daniel is filled with lots of stuff.
It is, and one of the reasons we know Jesus was God. There are other books that tell us this, Isaiah for sure.
Yes.
But Daniel gets very specific about when Jesus is going to show up, and that's
Yes.
all.
And-
That's all right there.
And it happened.
Though it's the one book in the Bible that says, "Seal this up for a later time."
Yes.
The only one I can think of, anyway. Which we're going to assume we're in the later time.
Yes.
And so we'll go into chapter 3. Thank you, John. Thanks for sharing. All right, before I get to chapter 3 tonight, though, we're going to need to do a little bit of chapter 2. Because chapter 3 is a direct response to chapter 2. So there are 3 things that I just want to point out as we get going. We'll look at Daniel 2, and we'll do a quick look at that. And then secondly, we're going to sort of look at the role of worship. That comes to the fore in this story right here. There's a lot of history, and we like to look at, hey, the Bible told the future, and that's all there. But the devil, Lucifer, did not want to worship God and said, it's not fair that we should have to worship you. And anybody who has a hard time worshiping is going to have a hard time with God. So this role of worship is an undercurrent here that I want us to keep in the back of our mind. And with that, I want to go to Exodus 20 and the second commandment, because this sets up the theme of worship right here. Starting at verse 4, this is the second commandment of the 10 commandments that God gave on Mount Sinai. He said, you must not make for yourself an idol or any kind of image or anything in the heavens or on the earth or in the sea. By the way, spoiler alert, chapter 3 is going to make one of those images idols. Verse 5, you must not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord, I'm a jealous God, and I will not tolerate your affections for some other god. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children, and an entire family is affected, even children to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who reject me. But I lavish unfailing love for 1,000 generations on those who love me and obey my commandments. Now, if you don't know God and you're tuned in here, that's kind of a hard passage, because God is much more than a God that stands up there and says, you must worship me. There's an ebb and flow to this. There's a relationship in there. Revelation explains, Jesus explains. There's some real beauty to that. But I wanted to take a nod to this, because in this part of Daniel, this commandment is just all over the place. But the people from Israel, Daniel and his 3 friends, but they know the 10 commandments, and they're going to live up to that. So Daniel chapter 2 has this image in it. If you know anything about Daniel, you'll know this. And Daniel had the dream, couldn't remember it. Daniel got the same dream, came and told Nebuchadnezzar the dream. The head is Babylon, your kingdom. You're the most valuable. You're the head. It's an incredible kingdom you have here, Nebuchadnezzar. But that's going to be taken over by the Medes and Persians, and that's going to be overtaken by Greece. And then later on, that's going to be taken over by the Romans. But the Romans isn't going to be taken over by one nation. It's going to be divided, some strong nations, some weak nations, and that's what we live in today. But the vision wasn't ended there. In this vision, a stone brought out of the ground, cut without human hands, was thrown down at the image and dispersed the whole thing, and the stone grew and grew and grew and grew, and that kingdom lasted forever. Now, that was a rush through that, but we kind of need that for context tonight. Nebuchadnezzar probably loved that he was the head of gold, but he didn't love the fact that another kingdom was going to come take his place. And some of us, when we read the Bible, we're like, I like some of it. Some of it's really cool, but these other bits over there, I could do without those. And we sort of make them try and fit the bits that we do like and the things that we like to do. Nebuchadnezzar was the king. He could do that. So instead of listening to the message of this vision, he went and made himself a 90-foot total gold. Some of that gold probably came from the temple, by the way. That's speculation, but it was a lot of gold, and the temple had a lot of gold. So there's a good chance that the temple was turned into this image. A 90-foot image, that's like a 7-8-story building. It was a very tall image. And Nebuchadnezzar brought all of his officials for a Babylon camp meeting and put them all around, played some music, and he's like, at this point here, I want everyone to bow down to Babylon and to this image, because we will never be defeated. We are Babylon. Babylon, Babylon, as we get, and that's what was going on. Daniel, I think worked out what was coming and had a reason to be away, but the three friends couldn't get out of it, and they just stood there, and we can't bow to an image, and so they refused to bow down. And that's the part of the story I want to come into as we go into chapter 3. I'm going to read the second half of chapter 3, and I've just sort of told the story up to it. So we'll put verse 19 up here on the screen, and we'll go on with the story from the Bible here. Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. Now, when you've brought all your people together, and someone's dissing you in front of everybody, it's going to make you mad. And Nebuchadnezzar seemed to understand what mad was. By the way, when you're angry or you're vengeful, it's really hard to worship. It's just hard to do those two things at the same time. Actually, it's impossible to do those two things at the same time. And so this is setting Nebuchadnezzar up for even more failure as he goes on. He commanded that the furnace that was over there for anyone who would disobey, it's almost like he knew someone might. He had a furnace for that. He says he ordered it 7 times hotter than usual, which doesn't make burning any more painful. But when you're mad, logic goes out of the window. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the furnace. Let's go to the next verse, verse 21. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king, in his anger, had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So actually, 7 times hotter was probably less painful than regular fire. It's just a feeling that I have. But Nebuchadnezzar's mad. The flames killed the soldiers. Verse 23. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Well, look," shouted Nebuchadnezzar, "I see 4 men unbound walking around in the fire unharmed. And the fourth looks like a god." I wonder what that looked like, how a god could emanate from fire. Anyway, next verse. Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, the officials, the governors, the advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their head was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Verse 28, then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted their God." Oh, I'm not quite done, sorry. I don't quite have it to memory. They trusted. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, Nebuchadnezzar says, "I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned to heaps of rubble. There is no God who can rescue like this." Now, save the last verse for just a second. King Nebuchadnezzar was impressed by what God did, but he doesn't understand God yet, because he's now doing what Lucifer accuses God of being. He's the most powerful, so you have to worship him. And God, in the verse that we read, does say that it's better to worship him. That's how life works. He is the creator and giver of life, but no one is forced to. The tree in the Garden of Eden, I think, is put there to demonstrate the choice that we have. The devil says that God forces his way on us, and God's like, no. But Nebuchadnezzar hasn't got that yet. He has seen God's power today and wants to worship God for his power. But if you've read the rest of the Bible, you realize that when Jesus came to this earth, he didn't come with power. He came as a baby. He came incredibly vulnerably. And we know that to be our God. So we don't just worship God because he's incredibly powerful. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I think they knew this. We worship God because of who God is, his character, how he treats people, his fairness, his justice, his mercy, his ability to leave his throne and come and be one of us to figure this thing out and bring salvation to us. Verse 30, then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. Now, just going to put a little plug in here. When you stand up for God, it doesn't always finish like this. Sometimes the flames give you a licking. And sometimes you don't get promoted. But we do have this story to know that God is in control. And even if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had died, which they said, even unto death we will trust our God, I think they were expecting to die that day. But God saved them, and God will save every single one of us as we are worshipers of God. He just loves that communion with us. And he could never let us go under those circumstances. He will absolutely save us. Daniel's an awesome book, as John pointed out. It's got the stories and it's got the prophecy and the timelines, and putting those together, it is a really nice book. And this may not be the crux of the prophecy part of the book, but it's showing, who do you worship? Who do you put your trust in? Is it going to be the best quarterback on your team could possibly get? Is it going to be the politician that is your favorite? Or is it going to be your God, who will take you and anybody who chooses to be a worshiper, to be in communion with God? He'll take care of you. I really believe that. And I offer my belief to you this evening. So with that, let's do a little bit of praying together, shall we? Let's pray. Oh, dear God, we see some almighty, amazing things in this world. Powerful people, clever people, athletic people. But God, we choose to worship you. We acknowledge your goodness, your ways. We trust you. And God, even when it's hard sometimes and we get weak and we just need, we think, relief, break, God, send your Holy Spirit in those moments to help us keep following you and your goodness. So God, we worship you. Help us keep our need for the weak, the distractions. Keep that at bay. We trust you for your joy, God. And even in the hardships, we want to carry your joy. Thank you for showing us that through other people. I know I need that, God. And God, tonight, I just give us friends to stand with. It's hard standing alone sometimes, God. We need our Shadrachs, our Meshachs, and our Abednegos. So for church families, Bible study groups listening, for us here, and those that might be listening to this alone, that kind of feel like they're doing their spiritual life alone, I pray tonight that you'll send them friends and support in their spiritual journey. Thank you for being the God that notices, hangs out with us. I pray this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Hosea next week. Until then, have a wonderful week. We plan on being back next Wednesday night. But for now, thanks for joining us. Here's your blessing.